Welcome to Nikki Woo Cozy Stories. I'm your host, Nikki. Tonight, we continue the story of Anne of Green Gables, Episode 6, The Brooch and the Picnic. So settle in and let the world grow gentle around you. Now, our story begins. By August, Green Gables had settled into the deep golden drowsiness of late summer. The orchards hung heavy and green beneath the sun. The fields beyond the house shimmered in the heat, and the air seemed full of quiet humming things. Bees among the clover, grasshoppers in the long grass, and leaves stirring lazily whenever a faint breeze wandered over the hill. Inside the kitchen, Marilla glanced at the clock. Then she looked out toward the yard. Anne was supposed to be indoors doing her sewing. Instead, she was perched up upon the woodpile, talking earnestly to Matthew, while Matthew listened with the absorbed attention of a man who had discovered that even the most ordinary afternoon could become remarkable if Anne Shirley explained it to him. Marilla gave a long, impatient sigh. "It's time Anne was in to do her sewing," she said sharply. "She stayed playing with Diana more than half an hour longer than I allowed, and now she's out there talking to Matthew 19 to the dozen. Matthew, for his part, appeared entirely content. That only irritated Marilla further. "The more she talks, the odder the things she says," she muttered. "The more delighted he seems." Then she tapped sharply on the window. "Anne Shirley, you come right in here this minute." A moment later, Anne flew through the kitchen door. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes were shining. Her unbraided hair streamed behind her in a bright torrent, and she looked as though some enormous happiness had caught her up and carried her all the way from the yard. "Oh, Marilla," she cried breathlessly, "there's going to be a Sunday school picnic next week at Mr. Harmon Andrews' field, right near the Lake of Shining Waters. And Mrs. Superintendent Bell and Mrs. Rachel Lynde are going to make ice cream. Think of it, Marilla. Ice cream." She clasped her hands together. "And oh, Marilla, can I go?" Marilla's expression remained stern. "Just look at the clock, if you please, Anne. What time did I tell you to come in?" Anne glanced toward it. 2:00, she admitted. "But isn't it splendid about the picnic, Marilla? Please, can I go? Oh, I've dreamed of picnics, but I never—" "Yes," said Marilla. "I told you to come at 2:00, and it's 2:45. Anne's face fell just a little. "I meant to come," she said earnestly. "I truly did. But Idlelight is so fascinating, Marilla. You have no idea. And then, of course, I had to tell Matthew about the picnic. Matthew is such a sympathetic listener." Marilla's mouth tightened. "You'll have to learn to resist the fascination of idle whatever you call it. When I tell you to come in at a certain time, I mean that time and not 45 minutes later. And you needn't stop to discourse with sympathetic listeners on your way either." Anne lowered her eyes, then peeped up hopefully. "But may I go?" "As for the picnic," Marilla said, as though granting no pleasure at all, "of course you may go. You're a Sunday school scholar, and I'm not likely to refuse when all the other little girls are going." The joy that broke over Anne's face was immediate and dazzling. Then almost at once, worry clouded it again. "But, Marilla," she faltered, "Diana says everyone must take a basket of things to eat." Marilla looked at her. "And?" "I can't cook, as you know," Anne said anxiously. "And I don't mind going to a picnic without puffed sleeves so much anymore. But I would feel terribly humiliated if I had to go without a basket." Her voice dropped. "It has been preying on my mind ever since Diana told me." "Well," Marilla said practically, "it needn't prey any longer. I'll bake you a basket." For one startled moment, Anne stood perfectly still. Then she rushed across the kitchen and threw her arms around Marilla. "Oh, you dear, good Marilla," she cried. You are so kind to me, and I am so much obliged to you." And before Marilla could prevent it, Anne kissed her cheek. The kitchen went suddenly quiet. It was the first time in Marilla's life that childish lips had touched her face willingly. Something sweet and startling moved through her heart. For a moment, she could not speak. Then, because the feeling disturbed her, she recovered herself briskly. There, she said. "Never mind your kissing nonsense. I'd sooner see you do exactly as you're told." But her voice was not quite as stern as she intended. Anne, too happy to notice the difference, glowed before her. "As for cooking," Marilla continued, "I mean to begin giving you lessons one of these days. But you're so feather-brained, Anne, I've been waiting to see if you'd sober down a little bit first." "I will try to sober down," Anne promised solemnly, "though I'm afraid it may take time." "It will certainly take practice," said Marilla. "Now get out your patchwork and have your square done before tea time." Anne fetched her work basket with a sigh and sat before a little heap of red and white diamonds. "I don't like patchwork," she said dolefully. "There's no scope for imagination in it. It's just one little seam after another, and you never seem to be getting anywhere." Her needle moved reluctantly through the cloth. "But of course," she added after a moment, brightening slightly, "I would rather be Anne of Green Gables sewing patchwork than Anne of any other place with nothing to do but play." Outside, the August afternoon was drenched in golden stillness. The orchard leaves whispered softly beyond the meadow, and in the quiet kitchen, with the promise of a picnic shining before her, Anne bent over her patchwork. Not happily, perhaps, but hopefully. The days before the picnic passed slowly, or it seemed to Anne Shirley, not because life at Green Gables lacked happiness. Quite the opposite. The late summer days glowed warmly around her now. The orchard rustled softly in the afternoon sunlight. The brook beyond the pasture wandered lazily beneath the trees, and every spare hour belonged to Diana. Yet somehow, knowing the picnic was coming made waiting itself feel enormous. Every morning Anne woke remembering, only 5 more days, only 4, only 3. And though waiting was difficult, Anne secretly found herself loving it too, because there was something delightful about imagining happiness before it arrived. Every afternoon, once chores were done, Anne hurried to meet Diana at Idlewild, the little grove that they had adopted as their kingdom of imagination. There, beneath the birches, they had arranged their playhouse with great seriousness. Broken dishes from Green Gables served as treasured china. A flat stone had become a table. Ferny corners transformed into grand sitting rooms, and nearly everything had acquired a beautiful name. Diana had brought something especially precious from home, a little piece of broken crystal from an old chandelier. It flashed brilliantly whenever sunlight touched it. "We shall call it our fairy glass," Anne declared reverently. Diana was delighted with the idea. They kept it carefully tucked among the roots of the birch tree, where it caught the afternoon light and shimmered like something enchanted. To Anne, the smallest ordinary things became beautiful when imagination touched them. One afternoon, as the girls wandered beneath the trees, Anne sighed deeply. "Don't you think," she said dreamily, "that everything is much more interesting when one imagines lovely things about it?" "I never thought much about it," Diana admitted. "Oh, but it is," Anne insisted. "There's so little scope in plain ordinary life if one doesn't imagine." She had lately begun borrowing books from Diana, stories filled with tragic heroines, noble sorrows, beautiful dresses, mysterious castles, and heartbreak carried nobly. Anne loved them passionately, sometimes perhaps a little too passionately. "Oh, Diana," she sighed one afternoon, lying beneath the birches with her hands folded beneath her head, "wouldn't it be romantic to have a sorrow one could enjoy properly?" Diana looked puzzled. "I'd rather have ice cream," she said. Anne sat up immediately. "The picnic," she gasped. For one dreadful moment, she had nearly forgotten how long remained. "Only 3 more days," Diana reminded her. Anne sighed tragically. "I don't know whether it's harder to wait for things or not have them at all," she declared. Then she paused. "No," she corrected herself thoughtfully. "I think perhaps it would be worse never to expect anything." That evening, while helping Marilla shell peas in the kitchen, Anne spoke of it again. "Mrs. Rachel says," Anne began, "that if you can't be cheerful, it is better to at least be as cheerful as you can." Marilla made a small sound of agreement. "But Mrs. Rachel also says," Anne continued, "that blessed are they who expect nothing, for they shall not be disappointed." Marilla nodded. "She's sensible." Anne considered this gravely. "But I think it would be worse to expect nothing than to be disappointed," she said at last. "Nearly everything is worth getting disappointed about if one has had the pleasure of looking forward to it." Marilla shook her head slightly. "You're a queer child, Anne." Anne smiled softly. Perhaps she was, but she still thought anticipation one of the loveliest things in life. As they worked, Anne's gaze drifted to the small amethyst brooch resting beside Marilla. It caught the evening light beautifully. The purple stones glimmered softly, deep as twilight. Anne leaned closer. "Oh, Marilla," she said quietly, "I do think that it's the most beautiful brooch I've ever seen." Marilla glanced down at it. "It belonged to my mother," she said after a moment, her voice quieter than usual. "My Uncle John brought it from England long ago." Very carefully, she opened up the clasp. Inside, protected beneath the glass, lay a tiny lock of soft brown hair. "My mother's hair," Marilla said simply. Anne grew still. Something about it felt unexpectedly sacred. The brooch had seemed beautiful before, but now it felt full of story, full of memory, full of love carried quietly through time. "Oh," Anne whispered softly, "how perfectly beautiful." And because it belonged to Marilla's mother, because someone long gone was still remembered through it, because Marilla treasured it so dearly, Anne thought she had never seen anything lovelier. "It seems," she said dreamily, "like something a very noble lady in a story might wear." And for a long moment afterward, Anne could not quite stop thinking about the deep violet sparkle of the little brooch. Saturday at Green Gables passed beneath warm August sunlight in the sweet heaviness of late summer. The orchard shimmered quietly beyond the windows. Bees hummed lazily among the clover, and Anne Shirley moved through the day with happiness constantly fluttering just beneath the surface. Only one more sleep. Tomorrow, the picnic. Even ordinary chores felt easier to bear with such joy awaiting ahead. She swept the kitchen, helped prepare food, folded laundry, and whenever no one was looking, found herself imagining tables spread beneath the trees near the lake of shining waters and bowls of ice cream waiting in the shade. Marilla, meanwhile, spent the afternoon preparing for Sunday. Toward the evening, she climbed the stairs to fetch her amethyst brooch. She meant to wear it to church the next morning, but when she opened the drawer where she always kept it, it wasn't there. Marilla frowned. That was odd. She searched carefully. Then again, the bureau, the little work basket nearby, the shelf above the washstand. Nothing. At last she stood for a long time still, thinking. Then she called downstairs. "Anne!" Anne came at once. "Yes, Marilla?" Marilla turned toward her. "Have you happened to see my amethyst brooch?" Anne's face brightened slightly in recognition. "Oh, yes," she said readily. "I did see it." Marilla looked relieved at once. "And where is it?" Anne blinked. Why, I don't know. Marilla paused. You don't know? No, Anne hesitated. I saw it in the afternoon when you went to Aid Society, she explained earnestly. I was passing your room and I saw it lying on the bureau. It sparkled so beautifully in the sunlight that I went in to look at it. Marissa listened carefully. You touched it? Yes, Anne admitted honestly. I picked it up and opened it to see the little lock of hair again. Her voice softened. I think it's such a beautiful thing, Marilla. Marilla's expression changed. And you put it back? I thought I did, Anne said slowly. The room grew quieter. Marilla looked directly at her. Anne, she said carefully, the brooch is gone. Anne stared. Gone? I can't find it anywhere. For a moment Anne looked bewildered. Then concern crossed her face. Oh dear, she said softly. Do you suppose it could have fallen somewhere? Marilla folded her hands together. It never falls anywhere. I always keep it in the same place. Anne looked troubled now. She thought hard. I remember putting it down, she said slowly. At least, I think I do. Marilla waited. Something uneasy had begun stirring inside her. The brooch had belonged to her mother. Anne knew perfectly well how much it meant. And Anne had been the last person to handle it. Are you quite certain you didn't take it somewhere else? Marilla asked. Anne looked startled. No, she said quickly. You're sure? Yes. Marilla's voice grew firmer. Anne. Something in her tone made Anne straighten. If you've taken it, Marilla said, you had better tell me the truth. Anne stared at her. But I didn't take it. Marilla did not speak immediately. The fact seemed painfully plain. Anne had touched it. Now it was gone, and Anne could not explain what happened. Anne Shirley, Marilla said at last, disappointment creeping into her voice. I'm afraid you are not telling me the truth. The hurt that crossed Anne's face came suddenly. I am, she whispered. Truly I am. Then where is the brooch? I don't know. Marilla's patience slipped. You may as well confess, she said firmly. There's no use making matters worse by telling stories. I'm not telling stories, Anne said, her voice trembling now. But Marilla had grown convinced. The brooch was too precious, the explanation too uncertain. And Anne had always possessed such imagination. At last Marilla spoke quietly but firmly. Until you are willing to tell me the truth, you may stay in your room. Anne stood very still. The words seemed not to settle at first. Then slowly, their meaning arrived. But Marilla, no. And after a pause, and unless this matter is settled, you needn't expect to go to the picnic tomorrow. The picnic. For one awful moment Anne simply stared. Then the color slowly drained from her face. Without another word, she turned and walked upstairs. A few moments later, the east gable door closed softly overhead. And all at once, Green Gables no longer felt quite so warm. The morning of the picnic dawned clear and beautiful. Sunlight spread softly over Green Gables, touching the orchard leaves with gold and waking the fields beyond into a warm shimmer of summer green. The brook moved quietly under the trees, and the air carried that bright, expectant freshness that belongs only to mornings when something wonderful is supposed to happen again. But in the east gable room, Anne Shirley did not feel wonderful at all. She had slept little. All night long she had tossed beneath the quilt, staring into the darkness, thinking of the picnic, the field beside the lake of shining waters, the baskets, the laughter, Diana, the ice cream, and all of it growing farther and farther away because of the brooch that she had not taken. By morning, misery had settled over her like a heavy cloak. When Marilla came upstairs, Anne was sitting by the window, pale and solemn, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Outside, the world looked painfully lovely. Marilla stood in the doorway. "Well, Anne," she said, "are you ready to tell me the truth now?" Anne turned slowly. Her face was grave. "Yes, Marilla," she said. "I'm ready." Marilla felt a small stir of relief. "Very well. Where's my brooch?" Anne drew in a deep breath. "I took it," she said. Marilla's expression hardened. "I thought as much." Anne went on quickly, as though afraid courage might fail if she paused. "I didn't mean to take it at first," she said. "I only wanted to look at it again. It was lying on your bureau, and it looked so beautiful, Marilla, so purpley and sparkling that I could not resist." Marilla said nothing. Anne clasped her hands tighter. "I pinned it to my dress," she continued, her voice growing more dramatic as the story unfolded before her. "For just a moment, I wanted to imagine I was Lady Cordelia Fitzgerald going to a royal ball." Her eyes drifted to the window, as though she could almost see the scene herself. "I imagined a dress of pale blue silk," she said softly, "with sweeping folds and silver embroidery, and my hair was not red at all, but dark and shining, and everyone thought I looked beautiful." Marilla gave a sharp breath. Anne returned sorrowfully to the matter at hand. "And then," she said, "I thought I would take the brooch outdoors. Only for a little while. I wanted to see how it would sparkle in the sunlight." "You took it outdoors?" "Yes," Anne said, with tragic dignity. "I went down the path toward the Lake of Shining Waters." The name itself seemed to deepen her sorrow. "The water looked so lovely," she continued, "all blue and gold with the sunlight moving over it. I leaned over the bridge to look at the brooch in the shining water." Her voice lowered. "And then?" Marilla's eyes narrowed. "And then?" Anne swallowed. "It slipped." The room became very still. "It slipped out of my hand," Anne whispered, "and fell down, 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 deep beneath the water. I saw it all the way. It went sinking so beautifully, Marilla, all purpley sparkling, and then it disappeared forever." Marilla stared at her. Anne looked utterly mournful. "I tried to reach it," she said, "but I couldn't. It was gone." The silence that followed was long and cold. At last Marilla spoke. "So that is your confession?" "Yes," Anne said faintly. "And you expect me to believe you took my mother's brooch out to the pond and dropped it into the water?" Anne lowered her eyes. "That is what happened," she said. Marilla's mouth tightened. The confession was absurd. And yet, it was exactly the sort of absurd thing Anne might do. To wear the brooch as Lady Cordelia, to carry it outside for the sunlight, to lean over the bridge and lose it in a fit of romantic imagining. It was ridiculous, it was infuriating, and horribly believable. Marilla turned away. "Well," she said, "you may stay here." Anne looked up quickly. "But I confessed." "Yes, and I'm very glad you have finally told the truth. But you are not going to the picnic." For a moment Anne didn't seem to understand. Then the word struck her. "Not going?" "No." "But Marilla—" "You took what did not belong to you. You lied about it, and now my brooch is gone forever. I told you last night unless the matter was settled, you could not go." "But it is settled," Anne cried. "I confessed." "Confessing does not undo the wrong." Anne rose from the chair, her face white. "Oh, Marilla," she pleaded, "please let me go. I have suffered so much already." "You should have thought of that before." The words sounded colder than Marilla intended. Anne sank back into her chair. Outside, birds sang in the orchard as though nothing had happened, as though this were not the worst morning of Anne's life. "If I can't go to the picnic," she said slowly, "I don't know how I shall bear it." Marilla hesitated, only for a moment. But she did hesitate. Then she remembered the brooch, her mother's brooch, the little lock of hair, the empty drawer, and she hardened herself again. "You will stay here and think over what you've done," she said. Anne's lips trembled. "Oh, all right," she whispered. Marilla turned to leave. At the door she paused. Anne sat still beside the window, looking out at the bright, beautiful morning. She could not enter. For one brief instant, something in the sight troubled Marilla. But she said nothing. She went downstairs and closed the door behind her. And in the east gable room, Anne Shirley listened to the cheerful sounds of the picnic morning drifting up from below, while her heart sank lower and lower, as though it too had fallen beneath the shining water and disappeared. The morning of the picnic had arrived so beautifully and bright. Sunlight drifted over the orchard, the leaves stirred lazily in the warm August breeze. Beyond Green Gables, the world seemed full of cheerful expectation. It was exactly the kind of day Anne Shirley had imagined all week, which only made it harder to bear. In the east gable room, Anne had dressed slowly that morning, not because she expected to go to the picnic, but because somehow remaining in bed felt even sadder. She sat by the window watching sunlight move over the fields. Now and then she imagined she could almost hear distant laughter already beginning somewhere near the lake of shining waters. At breakfast time, Marilla came upstairs. "Anne," she said, standing in the doorway, "you should come down and eat." Anne turned her face slowly. "I couldn't," she said faintly. "You must eat something." Anne shook her head sorrowfully. "I could not swallow a mouthful," she said. "My heart is too broken." Marilla tried not to sigh. "Being hungry won't mend matters." "No," Anne agreed sadly. "But eating breakfast seems so unromantic when one is deep in affliction." Marilla remained firm. "You'll come down for dinner then." Anne gave a hopeless little nod. When dinner time came, Anne appeared at last, but the bright expectancy that usually seemed to flutter around her had vanished. She moved quietly into the kitchen and sat down without speaking. Matthew looked up from his place at the table. Something about Anne's face troubled him at once. She looked pale, smaller somehow, as though sorrow had worn her thin overnight. Dinner was set before them, boiled pork and greens. Anne looked at her plate for a very long moment, then sighed. "Boiled pork and greens," she said mournfully, "are dreadfully unromantic food when one is in affliction." Matthew, who had never considered boiled pork and greens especially cheerful fare himself, felt a quiet sympathy for Anne. Marilla noticed the look that passed briefly across his face. "Anne," she said firmly, though not as sharply, "you must try to eat." Anne obediently took a few bites, but she did so with all the resignation of someone enduring a great tragedy. At last, she set her fork down. "I suppose," she said quietly, "the picnic has begun by now." No one answered. Anne looked toward the window. "Perhaps Diana is wondering why I'm not there," she added sadly. Matthew shifted uncomfortably. It seemed a hard punishment for such a small figure sitting there trying so bravely not to cry. After dinner, Anne went quietly back upstairs. Not quickly, not dramatically, only sadly, as though each step cost something. Later, in the afternoon, Matthew came in from the yard and paused near the kitchen door. "Won't Anne come down?" he asked quietly. "No," Marilla replied. She may stay where she is until she learns the consequences of such behavior. Matthew hesitated. She felt badly enough at dinner, he said after a moment. It seemed a pity she couldn't go. She should have thought of that before, Marilla said, though less firmly than she had earlier. Matthew was quiet for a little while. Then he said carefully, "Do you really think Anne took the brooch?" Marilla looked surprised. "She confessed to it." "Yes," Matthew said slowly. "But I don't know. It doesn't seem like Anne somehow." Marilla folded the dish towel in her hands. "She touched it, then it disappeared." Matthew nodded, but after a pause, he added softly, "Anne imagines dreadful things sometimes, but I think she means to tell the truth." The words lingered long after he had gone out again, because it was true. Anne imagined endlessly. Anne talked endlessly. But there had always been something painfully sincere about her. Still, the brooch had vanished. Anne had confessed. What else was Marilla meant to believe? Later that afternoon, Marilla went upstairs to straighten her room. The black lace shawl she had worn to Aid Society still lay folded over the chair. Absent-mindedly, she lifted it. Something caught the light. A tiny flash of violet? Marilla stopped. Very carefully, she unfolded the lace, and there, caught fast within the delicate threads, lay the amethyst brooch, safe, untouched. The purple stones glimmered softly in the afternoon light, and beneath the glass, Marilla's mother's little lock of hair rested quietly where it had always been. For a long moment, Marilla could only stare. Then slowly, the truth settled over her. Anne had told the truth, and Marilla had not believed her. Marilla stood for a long moment in her room, the amethyst brooch resting in her hand. The late afternoon light caught softly upon the violet stones, safe, untouched. All this while, Anne had told the truth. Marilla sat down rather suddenly upon the edge of the bed. "Well," she said aloud in the quiet room, "of all the extraordinary things." She remembered now, Monday afternoon, coming home from Aid Society, laying the black shawl across the bureau for a moment before folding it away. The brooch must have caught fast there without her knowing. And Anne, poor Anne, had suffered for it. Marilla drew in a long breath. "Dear life and heart," she murmured. "What does this mean? And whatever possessed that child to tell such an untrue story?" But even as she said it, something in her softened. Because however absurd Anne's invented confession had been, Marilla had frightened her into it. That uncomfortable truth settled heavily upon her. Taking the brooch in hand, she went upstairs to the east gable. Anne sat dejectedly beside the window. Her face looked pale from crying. Outside, sunlight still lay warm across the orchard. Somewhere far off, children's laughter drifted faintly on the breeze. Anne turned slowly as Marilla entered. There was such quiet misery in her expression that Marilla felt a sudden prick of conscience. "Anne Shirley," she said solemnly, "I have found my brooch." Anne stared. "You found it? It was hanging in my black lace shawl by the catch." For one moment Anne only blinked. Then something like hope flickered faintly across her face, before uncertainty returned. Marilla crossed the room. "Now," she said, though less sternly than usual, "I want to know what all that rigmarole this morning meant." Anne sighed, looking very tired suddenly. "Why," she said wearily, "you said you'd keep me here until I confessed." She folded her hands in her lap. "And so I decided to confess." Marilla stared. "You decided to confess?" Anne nodded. "I thought out a confession last night after I went to bed," she explained earnestly, "and I made it as interesting as I could." Marilla's lips twitched despite herself. "I said it over and over so I wouldn't forget it," Anne continued. "But you wouldn't let me go to the picnic after all, so all my trouble was wasted." For one dreadful moment, Marilla tried very hard not to laugh. Then suddenly, quite against her will, she did. A short laugh escaped her. Anne looked wounded. "Oh," she said quietly, "are you laughing at me?" "No," Marilla said quickly, sobering at once. "Well, perhaps a little, but not unkindly." She sat down beside Anne. "Anne," she said after a pause, "I was wrong." Anne looked up quickly. "I ought not to have doubted your word," Marilla continued. "I had never known you to tell a falsehood before." Anne listened solemnly. "Though," Marilla added, still very much herself, "it was extremely wrong of you to confess something you had not done." Anne lowered her eyes. "Yes," she admitted softly, "I suppose it was." Marilla sighed. "But," she said more gently, "I drove you to it." Anne looked up again. "So, if you will forgive me, Anne—" "Oh, Marilla," Anne burst out. "Then I will forgive you," Marilla finished, trying to remain practical despite the sudden lump in her throat. "And we'll start square again." Anne's face changed all at once, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "You mean—" "Yes," Marilla said briskly, before either of them could become overly emotional. "And now get yourself ready for the picnic." Anne sprang to her feet. "Oh, Marilla, isn't it too late?" "No," said Marilla. "It's only 2:00. They'll scarcely be gathered there yet, and it will be an hour before tea." Already she was moving toward the door in her practical way. "Wash your face, comb your hair, put on your gingham." Anne flew toward the washstand. "And I'll fill a basket for you," Marilla continued. "There is plenty baked in the house." She paused. "And I'll have Jerry hitch up the sorrel and drive you down." Anne whirled around. Oh, Marilla! 5 minutes ago she had been the most miserable child in Prince Edward Island. Now joy sparkled through every inch of her. 5 minutes ago, Anne exclaimed breathlessly, I was wishing I had never been born, and now I wouldn't change places with an angel. And for once, Marilla did not tell her not to speak nonsense. The picnic at Mr. Harmon Andrews' field was still in full cheerful motion when Jerry Buot drove Anne down at last. Children ran laughing between blankets spread beneath the trees. Voices drifted warmly through the late afternoon air. The lake of shining water shimmered nearby, soft and blue beneath the sunlight. And before Anne had even properly stepped down from the buggy, Diana Barry came running. "Anne," she cried. "Oh, Anne, I thought you weren't coming." For one shining moment, Anne could scarcely believe she had arrived after all. Only a short while ago, she'd been sitting sorrowfully at the east gable window, certain happiness had passed her by forever. And now, here she stood at the picnic. "Oh, Diana," Anne said breathlessly, clasping her hands, "I've had the most dreadful experience, but it has all turned out beautifully in the end." Diana listened with wide-eyed sympathy while Anne hurried through a shortened account of the day's sufferings. Though there was hardly time to tell very much, too many important things were waiting. Tea beneath the trees, games, friends, laughter, and most importantly, ice cream. Real ice cream. Anne had imagined ice cream often, but reality, she soon discovered, had surpassed imagination entirely. When at last a bowl was placed in her hands, Anne tasted it with great seriousness. For one long moment, she simply closed her eyes. "Well?" Diana asked eagerly. Anne opened them slowly. "Oh, Diana," she said with deep feeling. "It's simply scrumptious." Nothing else seemed sufficient. And because Anne Shirley possessed an extraordinary gift for happiness, sorrow began dissolving almost at once beneath sunshine, friendship, and delight. The terrible misery of mourning faded. The lost picnic was found again, and the world seemed beautiful once more. There were games upon the grass, tea spread beneath the trees, happy confusion everywhere. Anne threw herself into everything with all her heart. And later, when excitement overtook one of the boating games near the shore, and there came a moment of splashing confusion, Anne found the whole thing magnificently thrilling. Afterward, safely dry enough and full of excitement, she confided to Diana, "It would have been perfectly romantic to have nearly drowned." Diana looked alarmed. "I don't think it would." Anne sighed happily. "Well," she admitted, "perhaps not while it was happening, but afterwards it sounds wonderfully romantic." By evening, the sunlight had softened into gold. At last Jerry returned to fetch her home. Anne climbed into the buggy reluctantly. She had scarcely begun telling the story before they had reached Green Gables, and she still had at least 50 important details left untold. Marilla was in the kitchen when Anne came flying through the door. Her cheeks glowed, her eyes sparkled, and happiness seemed to flutter around her once more, exactly as it always had. "Oh, Marilla," she cried, "I had the loveliest time." "I'm glad of it," Marilla said, though quietly. Anne scarcely paused long enough to breathe. "The ice cream was perfectly scrumptious," she said reverently, "and there was such lovely tea, and everyone was so kind, and Diana saved me a place beside her." Her words tumbled joyfully onward. "And we nearly drowned." Marilla looked up quickly. "You nearly what?" "Well, not exactly," Anne admitted, "but it was very exciting." Then after a thoughtful pause, "And I think," she added solemnly, "that perhaps being miserable first made everything afterward seem even happier." Marilla gave a sound that might have almost been amusement. "You generally manage to find something cheerful in things eventually." Anne smiled. "Yes," she said softly, "though this morning I truly thought I should never be happy again." Later, when Anne had finally gone upstairs, still happily talking to herself about picnics, ice cream, and romantic near tragedies, Green Gables grew quiet once more. Matthew sat near the kitchen door. Marilla folded the last dish towel quiet and thoughtfully. For a few moments, neither spoke. Then Marilla said quietly, "She certainly has a way of turning the house upside down." Matthew smiled faintly. "But somehow," Marilla added after a pause, "it doesn't seem quite the same when she's unhappy." Matthew's eyes drifted briefly toward the staircase. "No," he said softly, "it doesn't." Outside, twilight settled gently over Green Gables. The orchard grew still. The house quieted around them. And upstairs, Anne Shirley drifted toward sleep, with picnic memories tucked warmly inside her heart. Ice cream, forgiveness, friendship, and the sweet feeling of happiness restored. For all her imagination, for all her talk, for all the troubles she sometimes brought, Green Gables had already begun, quietly and without quite meaning to make room for Anne. And now, the house grows quiet once more. The orchard rests beneath the evening sky. The lake of shining waters has gone still. And somewhere in the east gable room, Anne Shirley sleeps at last, her heart full once more. Tonight, There were disappointments, misunderstandings, hurts that felt, for a little while, too heavy to bear. But there was forgiveness too, and the quiet, ordinary kind of love that learned slowly, one mistake at a time. Perhaps that's part of growing, discovering that sorrow doesn't stay forever, that even the hardest mornings, joy may still arrive before the day is done. A picnic recovered, ice cream at last, a forgiven heart, and a home growing warmer in ways no one quite notices at first. So, let the quiet settle gently around you. Let the worries of the day grow distant. And rest here a while. Sleep now. You are safe. You are loved. And you have been listening to Nikki Woo Cozy Stories, created by Nicole T. Woodard. May your dreams be gentle and your sleep be deep.